I'm going to be talking a little bit about youth development. And a lot of my presentation, I'm going to be using language that's specific to that domain, and then also showing you the relationship in the language that we speak. And it's important to understand that, because having knowledge itself, like some of the other presenters that came up here and shared, it's important to be able to meet people where they are and to be an interpreter of sorts, where you can take the language that they have and put it in our own language if it applies, so that we can share it with each other. This is a picture of one of my students in my preschool. So to kind of give you a little background about myself, I teach preschool in my school district in Niagara Falls, right? So I've been teaching like early childhood for like the last 3 years, but I've been working with youth for 20 years, right? So a lot of us, when we came into knowledge of self, a lot of people came into knowledge of self for various different reasons. You know why I came into knowledge of self? When I saw pictures of the father in his mid-30s with people that age hanging around him, that's what moved me. Not people being loud or talking all scientific and trying to, you know, razzle and dazzle people. I looked at those pictures like, how is a man in his mid-30s getting children to skip school to hang out with him? Where he got to tell them, yo, you need to go to school, get an education. They wanted to be around him, so he couldn't have been corny, right? He wasn't teaching them something negative. What was he teaching them, right? I wanted to learn more about that. And I had some of that foundation in my family because my mother was the same way. She's born on June 13th, right? I got 6 siblings. She was a type of woman that our peers would come to the house just to visit her. If I'm not there, they'll come to see her.
That's right, God.
Take your time, God.
Take your time, man. That's my brother.
That's
Go ahead,
my brother.
son. Great. Use that energy, God. Use that.
My old dad was the same way, right? So both my parents, they had a good foundation in terms of cultural and social consciousness. So my old earth, she was a social psychologist. So who's seen the film The Matrix? She was the oracle with a Richard Pryor sense of humor. Right? Now my old dad, he was culturally conscious, so he collected African artifacts. He taught us about classical civilization before some of our ancestors arrived here to North America. So as I evolved and became 5%, it wasn't extreme from the things that they already laid as a foundation. They looked at it as a vehicle for growth and development, and they couldn't deny how I was actually evolving as a young man into a grown man as I am right now. So with my presentation, I wanted to just give you some background on things that I've learned and some techniques in regards to working with the youth. Because like I said, when I came into knowledge of self, it was the father's relationship with the youth that moved me. And that's what my driving force is. So I strive to figure out the most practical ways to reach the youth. So like I said, I teach early childhood development. I'm leaving tomorrow. I gotta leave probably about the quality hour tomorrow because I gotta get back Monday for my class, right? So I've got school in the morning, Monday morning. Right after that, I teach an after-school program with 9 to 12-year-olds. I also have a rites of passage program for young boys between the ages of 13 and 15, right? So I spend the majority of my time around youth. So I wanted to get some of y'all perspective on this picture right here. This is a picture of one of my preschoolers drew. What do y'all see?
Universe. Man, woman, and child.
True indeed. True indeed. What else y'all see?
People coming together.
Okay.
Man, woman, and child.
Huh?
Man, woman, and child.
True indeed.
There's no disconnect. Everybody's touching each other.
True indeed.
And I see the balance.
Huh?
I see the balance as well between man and woman with the baby in the middle.
Could you tell this? Okay. Now peep this. Peep this. This is the girl that drew it. This is the mother. Does that look like a mother?
Oh.
That's the mother. Look at her arm around the father. He only has one leg. Right? Now, because I know her, I have a relationship with my student and the parents, I know this to be like exactly what she was able to communicate with the drawing. So we talk about things being a fine mist that the naked eye can hardly detect, right? A lot of times things are a fine mist and we don't have a relationship. And when a person doesn't see you right, they probably won't treat you right. If they're not treating you right, they're probably not going to teach you right. So what I'm going to talk about is called continuity of care. This is language that's used oftentimes in early childhood development, right? So this is what it means. Continuity of care is used to describe programs and policies that ensure children and families are consistently engaged in high-quality growth and development experiences through stable relationships. Negate all of this, all that means is stable relationships. Caring for one another and providing some stability through relationships. So why is this important? One reason it's important is because oftentimes you see a chronic scarcity of resources in inner cities and in rural communities, which means some people don't care, right? Another reason is because of that, you see a lacking of programs and policies that are culturally competent and anti-bias, meaning sometimes people don't care because they can't even relate to the people that they're supposed to be caring about. And that oftentimes happens even in our own community. We can understand that, especially being 5% and even having people in our own family, our own community that look at us as if we're different, right? Single mothers had over 80% of 12 million single-parent households in the country. High-risk times for juvenile delinquency are between the hours of 3 and 7. So one thing that you may notice in your areas is you see after-school programs and stuff because those are the high-risk times that they target. Sedentary lifestyles, people not necessarily being active, and millennials are the first generation that will not outlive their parents. These are some statistics related to our education system that's from the Department of Education. In 2012, the percentage of black male students who have been suspended from school was more than twice the percentage of Hispanic, white, Asian, and Pacific Islanders. It's also the same way with young black female students, right? In 2011 to 12, elementary and secondary education workforce was overwhelmingly 82% white in public schools. And that's not changed in over 15 years. 7% of all teachers were black. Education leaders are predominantly white. So in 2011 to 12, during the school year, only 20% of public school principals were individuals of color. So you're looking at a school system that is predominantly white, and then even when you're looking at it on an administrative level, it's predominantly white. large majority of education majors, more specifically students enrolled in teacher preparation programs, are white. Between 2012 and 13, 25% of individuals enrolled in a teacher preparation program based in an institution of higher education were individuals of color. So all these statistics are telling you, first of all, you have school districts that are overwhelmingly white, that our children are oftentimes going to. If they need some kind of support, you don't have our people in a position of administration for support. And going back to what I was talking about in terms of just the continuity of care, you have a disconnect a lot of times with parents for various reasons why they may not be either empowered or educated to actually provide that support. These statistics are saying our children are out there by themselves. That's what that says, right? So what could we actually do about that? So in my mind, like I said, I've been working with you for 20 years, from preschool all the way up to college age. And over a period of time, I realized, like, yo, I got to get involved in early childhood development, you know? Because those statistics, when you look at it, in terms of us not being represented in the education system as black people, it's even much more of a disparity when you get into early childhood development. So you don't see me as a preschool teacher. If you do see me as a black male, usually that black male is homosexual.
That's right.
Or he has a partner that is not reflective of who he is.
That's right.
But not me. You're not going to see me. Right? So one of the things that I started to recognize is we got to start reaching our children as early as possible. And this is one reason why. Brains are not just born, they're built. Hold on for a second.
We are scientists of life, which means we study everything. And that's not always easy, because there's things that we learn we never even heard of before. So there's three things that actually happen in our journey. We unlearn some things, we learn some things new, and then we also discover that some of the things we always learn are still good for our journey. As scientists of life, one of the most important things that we study is our own childhood, because there were many different experiences we had growing up that form the basis of how we see things today. In fact, some of our experiences are the actual brain architecture of how we think. Take a moment and check this out.
Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across a net, various forms of communication pass between the two, from eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. If a child is exposed to serious ongoing hardships like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support, the basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he is at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place.
So what it's basically telling you is that we're brain architects when it comes to our children. And if we're not constructing their brains, who's actually going to do that? Right? Children are born from a physical womb into a social, emotional womb. So as an early childhood educator or preschooler, I'm teaching them a lot about social, emotional development. Not just necessarily teaching them the alphabet or numbers, but how I actually interact with them. By the time a child is 6 years old, what degree do we learn about that at? What degree is that in 1 to 40s? About 6 years old. Wisdom. Okay. When a child is 6 years old, their brain is 95% developed. So those years of their age, that's where you're actually, as a brain architect, seeing their determined idea being made manifest. That's science. Formative year impressions, meaning from 6 years old under, when the brain is being developed, that circuitry is being constructed and the brain goes through a process known as synaptic pruning. Have you ever seen people in their yard pruning the hedges, making it nice and, presentable? The brain goes through the exact same process with all of the different activity that a child's brain is going through. You've heard the phrase, if you don't use it, you lose it. That's literally happening to a child's brain as they're going to develop it in their formative years. So whatever you are actually putting into that child's brain is either going to be lost forever or it's going to be pruned in such a way where they're helping them think more efficiently. A child needs to be exposed to something 10 to 12 times in order to respond to it. Right? This is all science. A lot of times you see programs on television, or a lot of times you see people investing billions of dollars in this right there because they know that a child is going to respond in a certain type of way. Now think about it. I'm teaching preschool and I know all of this. Right? So I'm deliberate about the things that I expose them to and what I teach them. All children go through certain predictable developmental stages which demand developmentally appropriate practices, which means I always say that we're not just born, we're consciousness incarnated in this form. And when you look at a child, a baby, you can see them starting to learn how to use the form, right? So as you're learning how to use this form, there are certain stages that you naturally go through. When a child is first born, they're not able to actually hold certain objects. It takes them a little bit of time to develop those type of motor skills, right? When I first started teaching preschool, I had a cup of water, and let me show you this. I had a cup of water, and I gave it to one of my students because he was thirsty. I just handed it to him like that. He picked it up and was like, and it just went right down his shirt. And I didn't know, he's not developmentally at that stage where he knew what to do. Now, that's where he was. I have another student sitting right next to him that's like, So even though children go through those predictable developmental stages, there are certain times children are more advanced than others. And that's something that you have to think about and consider. There are certain learning styles, visual. Some people learn also through their ears, and some people learn with their hands. You have to recognize that in children, Because if you don't recognize it, you might end up getting frustrated that a child is not listening to you when that's not their learning style or their strength. Hand it to them and show them, and then they'll get it that way. Right? And this is something that I created that I share with my students.
Knowledge, wisdom, understanding, culture, power, equality. God built or destroyed, born cipher, back to me. Knowledge, wisdom, understanding, culture, power, equality. God built or destroyed, born cipher, back to me.
So now, something like that, right? Repetition, a child being exposed to something 10 to 12 times, they're being exposed to everything else. So I flip it and use things that I want them to actually be exposed to. At the same time, because I create animation, I will create one of them and put them in the cartoon. You think they want to watch that? Right? So now I want to talk a little bit about strength-based approaches in learning. This is one of my other students right here. Well, this isn't, but you know who she is, right? Everybody know who she is, right? Now some people see that, oh my gosh, she is singing Cardi B. Oh my God, what's wrong with her parents and everything else, right? But if you really listen, she edited out the curse words, right? And she was singing, she don't need to be a stripper when she get older. That sounds positive to me, right? So when it comes to strength-based approaches to learning, it's about striving to find what is the strength in what this person is actually talking about or where they're coming from. Let's build on that, right? So it's a concentration on the strengths of an individual, not their deficits. Why? Because it's a fine mist the naked eye can hardly detect. What do y'all see? Huh? Okay.
Is that Stonehenge? It looks like Stonehenge.
I took that picture in 2017. Right? That's what I see. And that's what I showed him. Right? Other teachers, they may not have the cultural competence to make those type of connections. So that's a teachable moment. Like I said, the majority of what I do is social emotional, building with my students. I know some of y'all are familiar with some of these very different celebrities who have been called everything in the book: defiant, talkative, disruptive, disobedient, obnoxious. I like obnoxious children. Just put that out there, right? But what's the strengths in those qualities? Usually when they go to some of the administrators or the teachers that schools they attend, that's what they're seeing. You just define. This is what I see. I see leaders because they're not going along with everybody else.
Right.
That's a leader. You may call it defiant, whatever you want. This person is also self-determined. A lot of times when you look at youth, they may be following and being easily led in the wrong direction, whatever the trend is. But when you see one that's like, no, I'm not going to do that. You pull them aside, you build with them because they have some sense of identity already. They may not be able to articulate it, but that shows you that there's a strength there. talkative one. They're pretty confident to be running their mouth all the time. They're relatable, they're social. They have a lot of skills and gifts that can be utilized if you're able to recognize it and build on it. Give them something else to talk about. Right? The disruptor. The disruptor. That's your artist. That's your innovator. Right? Give them something to disrupt in a positive way. And recognize that it's okay to think for yourself. Disobedient. Bad. The ones that's bad probably have a good sense of what good is. Does that make sense to y'all? The ones that are bad already have a good sense of what good is because they're going against it, which also shows you that they have some sense of justice in there. If they're doing the opposite, they can probably articulate to you why they're not going along with this. That's showing you equality. Right? Obnoxious, loud. They're the most magnetic. They're going to come in the room and they're going to be seen and they're going to be heard. Period. Right? If we can build on some of those qualities and recognize those are strengths that they actually have, then we can help them grow and develop and set them on a different trajectory. Right? Because right now, sometimes you have people who are just looking at those as deficits. The reason why I put the picture of them up there is because some of them have been labeled the exact same way. Some of us have been labeled the exact same way.
One child with all of those qualities, and he had a hard time in school. Oh, I was
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Very difficult
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times, children, because going back to what I was saying about in early childhood development, when they're developing social emotionally, right? They're also developing linguistically. They're also learning the language to articulate what impressions they get from the environment. So they may not have the language to communicate why they don't like something or why they don't want to go along with something. Sometimes we don't like something or don't go along with something as well, but we may have the language to be able to articulate that. They're learning the language of how to navigate. So a lot of times, it's okay for children to protest and not go along with certain things. You have to be able to show them more of the appropriate ways to protest and not go along with things. So the social emotional aspect is one of the most important parts of building with our youth. So now when I'm talking about all of this, right, I'm not talking about ignoring deficits or what you may consider to be negative. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you change the narrative and you speak a different language in terms of giving them credit for the things that they actually bring to the table. It's kind of like how many people have been employed at different places and you have a yearly evaluation. A yearly evaluation. Would you feel different or think differently about that process if it was called a performance appraisal or a